So moving on to Module 2, and Module 2 is about the climate hazards and challenges that are likely to occur in particular locations. And like Module 1, it is pre-populated before the workshop. The idea, as you'll see as we move through, is to identify these climate hazards that are going to impact and then to estimate the economic risk that they pose in the particular location that you're focusing on in the workshop. So at the end, you get rankings of the relative risk of these different agroclimatic climate challenges. There's various modules here. There's 3 distinct types of modules though, submodules. The first one is looking at the climate hazards, identifying them. The second one is looking at which crops you want to analyze for. And then 2.3 to 2.10 is the same template, and it's evaluating the climate hazards in relation to the key cropping activities, and then you'll get some results that look at the key climate hazards and the key vulnerabilities that are part of this agroecology. Module 2.1 is then about specifically setting out the climate hazards that are going to impact on a particular location. And the tool is set up for a minimum of 5 and a maximum of 10 climate challenges. We capture this first through a category. At the moment, the categories are temperature, excessive water, insufficient water, radiation, storms and cyclones, or other. So we select one, and then we put in the specific hazards. So for instance, temperature might be extreme heat days, and we expect them in midsummer. So just using those notes just to really clarify anything that you want to be specific about within the hazards and the hazard specifics. So as we go down, we can fill these with the different hazards that we expect. So there might be flash flooding, there might be cloudy days or increased cloudy days. All of these relate to an increased hazard, climate hazard. Insufficient water might be dry spells in wet season, and storms and cyclones just might be higher damage in storm season. And we'll put some notes in there specific to what it is that comes. So once we put in 5, you'll see that this changes. So it now says if you are finished, then put NA. So you could put 5, you could put 10, you could put 7. But when you're done with the key climate challenges, simply go to the next hazard category box and type N-A. What will happen is it will close off. So that's part 1, and then part 2 is just a filter function. So which seasons do each of the climate challenges relate to? So do the extreme heat days apply to the wet season? In this case, no, and in this case, yes. So we fill this through. So the excessive water is only relevant in the wet season. It's not relevant in the dry season. Cloudy days, so that is relevant to both seasons. Insufficient water, dry spells in the wet season, so that applies to the wet season but not the dry season. And the storms and cyclones applies just to the wet season and not the dry season. So once we've filled all that, we come down, we get this warning again that says that, are you sure that you filled it correctly? Because there'll be substantial time backtracking if you don't, if you progress and then you need to come back and change anything. So at that point, we click to progress. So module 2.2 is simply a filter function that wants to ask of the key crops that you've identified in the earlier modules, which one do you want to include in the analysis? So at the moment, if we go back to our results over here, we ran so far just for the 3 crops and then rice across 2 seasons. If you had 8 crops here, then the same thing, the tool would be asking you all 8 to include or not. And at the moment, it's suggested that if it's less than 5% of the total value, economic value of loss, it'll go no. And if it's above that, it'll go yes. But it's really the choice here to think about how deep do you want to go into your analysis across how many crops would you like to go. And the way this relates is you can see there's 2.3 to 2.10, so there's 8 tabs there, and that relates. So if you were to click yes to all 8, then you would have to fill in all 8 of these tabs. At the moment, if we left this as is, we'd have 2.3 as rice in the dry season, 2.4 as rice in the wet season, sugarcane, mango, and then the remaining 4 would be blank because they're not there. So just so we get a sense of it, we'll go over here and we'll say that we're not interested in analyzing the climate impacts on mango. So we just click no, and that will basically filter it out so that we only do rice in the dry season, rice in the wet season, and then sugarcane. They're the only 3 combinations that we'll look at for the remainder of the tool. We put some notes there. So if we've excluded mango, we'll put some notes here about why we excluded mango, and then we'll click to progress. So modules 2.3 through 2.10 are the same template. So I'll just show it once. The difference is that each time it changes the crop and season that we're talking about. So in 2.3, we're talking exclusively about rice in the dry season and climate hazards. So that's this most economic value loss, most economic value that is has come through module 1 in the tool. And there's 2 sides to this. So the first side is around the area of rice dry season production that is likely to be impacted by these 2 challenges, extreme heat days and cloud days. These have come from over here. So we said it was the dry season. So we said that extreme heat days and cloudy days were the 2 climate challenges that were impacting on the dry season. So the first question there is, what percentage of rice dry season area will be impacted by extreme heat days? So in this case, it's likely to be quite high. The same with cloudy days. It really is likely to capture the whole area. What the second part of the module is then is the likelihood that we will have extreme heat days and the impact. So this is over the next 10 years, how likely are each of the following outcomes likely to occur for rice in the dry season? Extreme heat days that cause no yield impact. So if we think about in the next 10 years, how many of the next 10 years are we unlikely to have any impact of extreme heat days? So let's just say that 3 out of the next 10 years we don't expect to have extreme heat days. That would mean that 7 of the next 10 years we're expecting to have some extreme heat days cause damage to rice in the dry season. Then it's about categorizing that. So up to 25% yield loss, from 25 to 75%, and then catastrophic at greater than 75% yield loss. So it's probably something, and again, this is just dummy numbers that I'm putting in. What you can see is that if you go 100%, you'll get an error message. If we pull that down and we say that we're not expecting any catastrophic yield impact from extreme heat days over the next 10 years, and probably some negative yield impact there. Now, the same for cloudy days and no yield impact. It's probably more likely that we won't have a lot of impact from this climate hazard. So it might look something like this. So once we've filled in for those 2 challenges, we'll put some notes in. Any discussion that we had in the workshop, that'll come through here. And then we click on. So this time, same format, but we're talking about rice in the wet season. Now, if we go back, we can see that the wet season challenges are quite different. So we've again got this area impacted. So flash flooding on rice in the wet season. So this is where it becomes a bit different from the dry season, because we've got something that's only likely to affect the lower land areas. rather than upland or irrigated areas. So maybe that in this situation is smaller. Maybe that's 50 or even 40%. Cloudy days, again, that's affecting the whole area. Dry spells. So dry spells in the wet season, that's only going to affect the non-irrigated areas. So maybe that's only 60%. And higher damage in the storm season, really that's quite a widespread hazard. So it's probably back up there. So we go over again, over the next 10 years, how likely are each of these to occur for rice in the wet season? So I'm going to go ahead and populate these and then show you what we have. I've gone ahead and populated this. Start to think about, flash flooding. Maybe half of those next 10 years we're not expecting it, but when it does happen, it can cause some quite strong damage. The same with cloudy days. Maybe there's not a lot of impact that's going to come through even when it does happen. You'll see that when we go to an annual or a perennial like sugarcane, it's asking all of the relevant climate challenges that are faced there, but it's different again. So flooding is at the extreme. We're not expecting it, but when it happens, it's quite bad. Maybe we're more resilient as a crop, as sugarcane as a crop, to cloudy days, or maybe the flash flooding. Maybe sugarcane is not necessarily planted in lowlands. So these are the sorts of things that the tool will capture. And as you'll see here, we're in 2.5, but it's giving us the skip straight to the results. And we're skipping over these because we're not being asked for those crops. We're just being asked for the first 3. So this is what our results look like, and it's spread across 2 tabs. The first tab is around the impacts of the climate challenges, and 2.2 is around the vulnerabilities to climate hazards, so slightly different. What you get is the different combinations. So here, the challenge is crop by season by adaptation challenge. So the most damaging combination, according to the junk data that's in there, is higher damage from storms on rice in the wet season. And that's coming through because we said that when it happens, it's really bad, and rice in the wet season is a really economically important crop. So that's why that's coming out on top. So it scales back across those 3 combinations. We also then have adaptation challenge, the challenge by season, the challenge by crop, and just the priority challenges. So we see them across those 4 that come across there. So they're basically summed smaller and smaller as we move to the right of the page. What we then have, if we progress, is to the vulnerabilities. So this is basically saying when we look at the vulnerability to different climate hazards, what crops, what seasons, and what crop season combinations are the most vulnerable to being impacted by all of the climate challenges. So this comes out and says that rice in the wet season is the most vulnerable if you consider all of the different combinations of challenges that come in. Here that the wet season is far more vulnerable than the dry season. And in terms of crops, that rice is actually about twice as vulnerable in terms of economic loss as sugarcane. So these are what the results look like at the end of part 2, module 2. So that's module 2 now, and a review of module P and 1. So the next steps are, I'll send you a clean copy and play from the start again with module P, 1 and 2 all together, because I'm 100% sure, because there was some substantial recoding, that there's going to be some bugs in there. So please go through to the end of 2, find the bugs for me. If you find the bugs, send a message in WhatsApp or send me an email, and we'll try and overcome those as quickly as possible so that everybody, by the time we come to our meeting on the 9th of August, has a functional copy that the bugs have been found and that you've had a play all the way through, and we're ready to talk about the changes that need to happen. So please send that back to me, and then we've got our next meeting the same time as last week on Wednesday the 9th of August. See you then.